Hello, hello, hello. Wow, look at this beautiful crowd. Can you just give yourself some applause? Just because you're so beautiful. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Abena Sankofa Imhotep, and I'm proud to serve on the board of the Des Moines Public Library Foundation. Thank you for being here tonight and for being part of our special 25th anniversary AViD series. AViD would not exist without donors and sponsors. We have 15 generous organizations and households funding AViD this year. Several are here with us tonight. Can we please show our appreciation for their amazing generosity? If you're not familiar with the foundation, we provide funding for nearly 90% of the free programs provided by Des Moines Public Library. That includes AViD, but also summer reading, which helps 10,000 kiddos annually, community outreach, public access computers, and so much more. We gave a record $300,000 to Des Moines Public Library last year. Right? Yeah. And we're on track to provide even more support this year. And so I invite you to join us. Every gift helps, no matter the size. You can donate online anytime at dmplfoundation.org, dmplfoundation.org. Another important way that you can help is to be an advocate. Many of you already know that the City of Des Moines will be making budget cuts, and the library is very likely to be impacted. Ooh. If you're a Des Moines resident, please contact your city council representative and let them know just how important the library is to you and your family and your neighborhood. You can also, yes, thank you. You can also attend the city council work session this coming Wednesday, 7:30 a.m. This will be, oh. So at least there's somebody in the middle section that will be at the work session. The work session on Wednesday at 7:30 a.m. will be a discussion of proposed budget cuts, and the public is welcome. There will also be a survey and more public hearings this summer, but the library needs your voice now. 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 Two brief housekeeping notes. One, your feedback helps us improve AViD. Please fill out and return the evaluation form or scan the QR code on the form to share your feedback online. And two, the lovely Tayari Jones will sign books tonight. Our friends from Beaverdale Books are here, and 10% of every book purchased will benefit the Library Foundation. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's moderator, Victoria Henderson Weber, President of the NAACP Des Moines branch. Victoria is a strategic leader, advocate, and systems thinker committed to advancing social justice, equity, and civic engagement. She was elected president in 2019 and re-elected twice. Beyond her leadership in the NAACP, Victoria is especially passionate about public education, children in foster care, and equitable access to civic participation. Please join me in welcoming Victoria.
Is that better? Okay. So as Abena mentioned, my name is Victoria Henderson Weber. I am incredibly honored to be here with you this evening. By day, I work in public transportation, and I do that because I care about helping people get where they need to go. As she also mentioned, I serve as the president of the Des Moines branch of the NAACP, where my work is rooted in community, justice, and belonging. So when I read Kin, I came to it not only as a reader, but as someone who thinks a lot about how people move through the world, who gets supported, who gets left behind, and who gets to call somewhere home. Tonight, Tayari Jones and I are going to have a conversation here on stage, and then we'll begin taking your questions. You should have a question card on your chair, near your chair. Please write down anything you'd like to ask, and volunteers will be by to collect those cards for when the audience Q&A begins. After the program, Tayari and I will be signing books, and Beaverdale Books will be here with copies available for purchase. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest. Tayari Jones is the New York Times best-selling author of Kin and American Marriage. Her work has been selected for Oprah's Book Club twice. She's received major literary honors, including the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Aspen Words Prize, and the NAACP Image Award. Her writing explores family, love, loss, race, class, and really all the complicated bonds that shape how and who we become. Her newest novel, Kin, follows Annie and Vernice, a novel about about mothers and daughters, friendship, sisterhood, respectability, freedom, and the many ways that Black women survive. Please welcome me, or please help me welcome, leave it to me, please help me welcome Ms. Tayari Jones. Now, I want y'all to know I had more to say, but she told me to not do that. I want to start, and y'all, I'm incredibly nervous because I'm a fangirl. I have read all of the books, all of the short stories, and listened to them all multiple times on Audible, in Libby Library. I have my notes, so please forgive me for reading some of these, but I don't want to miss anything. And so first, I personally want to thank you for this work. I once arrived in Atlanta, young, poor, and by bus, to attend a historically Black college. My school was Morris Brown, not Spelman. But I immediately recognized the world of Atlanta, the world of the Atlanta University Center, and it felt very much like I was back home. I also know the world of Black women's organizations, the discipline, the uninterrupted white, the respectability that can serve as both a protection and as pressure for us in those spaces. So really the book felt familiar to me in a different way. I feel like I know each of these characters personally, or I have relationship with them. And so they feel like my sisters and my cousins and my elders and my community overall. And it is rare that we can identify our community in a book in such a way. And so I want to begin there. When you were writing Kin, did you find yourself trying to interrogate a world, or did you find yourself trying to return to one?
Turned it on. I turned it on. I found myself writing Kin. I do write the world of Atlanta. Atlanta is my muse, and all of the things I write are set in that city. And I feel like I interrogate it, but I love the city. I love Black people, and so I don't write a novel kind of intending to expose anything. I think I write to explore. I guess that's what I'll say. I write to explore a world. I grew up on the southwest side of Atlanta. So these people in the book, these are my people. This is what I know best. And I wanted to write about them in a complex way, in that, like you said, they're the historically Black colleges in Atlanta. And I'm a graduate of Spelman College. And I feel like people think of the historically Black colleges, particularly Spelman and Morehouse, as a place where the Black middle class, the Black elite, send their children to be educated. But I think that really obscures a very strong, proud working class tradition of these institutions. So many people came to these colleges from little towns throughout the South. I met a woman who's 97 years old. She came to Spelman with every cent her community could spare fit inside a stocking. And she came to school with just that stocking and gave it to the president, who poured out the money, folded the stocking, and returned it because she knew she could not spare as much as one stocking. And asked her, "Where will you live?" And she said, "Well, my mother knows someone who works for some people, and somewhere I'm going to stay at their house." And the president of Spelman said, "My dear, I think you would be better served to live in a dormitory." She had never heard that word, dormitory. And this book gave me an opportunity to use that word, dormitory, with the reverence that this woman spoke of it. And that woman now, she's 97 years old, and she has a PhD in Shakespeare. And I feel like these schools not only serve a middle class, they created a middle class, and they need credit for that.
So at the center of the novel are Annie and Vernice, or Nisi, two girls bonded by motherlessness, but definitely not in the same way. I spend a lot of my volunteer time working in foster care space. I'm a foster mother, and I teach or facilitate foster parent classes. And one of the things that we discuss heavily in that space is unambiguous loss. So in your book articulates it so well. You have two great examples of somebody who has a level of finality. She knows exactly where her mother is. And then you have the individual who doesn't. Is this something that did it develop along with your characters, or did you look to explore that from the beginning?
Like, the way that I come about a story is kind of mysterious to me. I do think there is that Toni Morrison story where the two girls are living in like an orphanage home for children, and one's mother is dead. She has a beautiful dead mother in the sky, and the other's mother, what did they say? She danced too much. She stayed out too late. And so each of them thinks the other girl is lucky. And I did use that, like, Nisi's mother was killed when she was just an infant. And so everyone's like, "Oh, you poor thing, I knew your mother, she was such a lovely person," et cetera, et cetera. So she has this beautiful sainted mother, where Annie's mother has run off. And that is the cardinal sin, to run off and leave your children. And Annie's mother, the word that everyone uses to describe Annie's mother is trifling. And that is like the curse of all curses. And she has a shame of having been abandoned, but she also has that hope, because she wakes up all the time thinking, maybe today is the day my mother will come back. And when she gets older, she thinks, maybe today is the day I'll find her. And the question is, who is the lucky one? Who is lucky? Because although you wake up with hope every day, you go to bed disappointed.
The going to bed disappointed part.
And it is cumulative, right? The disappointment becomes cumulative.
One of the things that you touch on, and the words that you use, is that you have a character who is being tended to, and you have a character who is being mothered. Annie and Nisi do wind up with, really, the way I see it, no less than 3 mothers each by the time the book is done. How did you decide, and this is hard because we're not allowed to give spoilers.
That is true. We are very serious about that, are we not? Next.
My feelings are hurt because there's questions I can't ask.
But let me see what you got.
No, no. It's all right. How did you decide which one would be mothered and which one would be tended to within their other relationships?
I'm so confused by that question.
Oh,
Just cover your mic.
no, it's all right. How did you decide which one with the other relationships, with the other mothers, the chosen mothers?
Okay, see, I find the question of deciding, I don't know that I decide in that way. You know, like I don't storyboard and move the people around. I feel like the things happen to the characters that happen to them.
Okay.
But I do think that this idea of seeking found family and chosen family, that is a big theme in this book, but I am very wary of, I don't want to accidentally also I don't want to seem to be making the point that we have found family because our biological family is not getting the job done. You know, because whenever you start using the word biological, that means you don't like those people. Like if somebody says, yes, he is my biological father, yeah, that's not good. But I think part of growing up and being an adult are the families, I don't even want to say found, the families we curate. And so I think that both these girls, it's true, they are not reared by their mothers, but they do find other people that mother them in their lives. They both do, some more formally than others, like one has a mother-in-law. But I think that we all do it, and I think it should be celebrated and not looked as a referendum on the other people in our lives. And I just felt like everybody has people. I mean, I think each one of us has someone in our life, like on Mother's Day, there's somebody that we feel we should send a card to. And these relationships may not be formal, but they're so meaningful. And I had a lot of fun with all those old ladies in this book.
Yeah.
I feel like they are bringing the wisdom to the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'll change my next question then. Is there anything then, since you let the story write itself, is there anything that you found in this story needing to resist? Like it would be too much to take it one direction or another? That's a no.
Well, no, I don't. Well, I mean, the way the stories roll out, I'm surprised as the characters when surprising things happen.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, test, test, 1, 2.
Okay, I was going to use like my Black History Week voice when we used to have to say those Langston Hughes poems. Okay, shoot, I forgot what I was talking about. What were we talking about? See, she done scrolled down.
Was there anything that you had to resist?
Oh.
Like it would maybe lean the story one way too much or the other?
Here's the thing, like I feel when I write a story, I feel like the story is happening, and I am reporting the story that happens. And so the story can't go one way, too much in any way, because it's the way the story went. But the stories do surprise me. Like when I was writing about Annie's great road trip to go looking for her mother, like I knew from research that they used the Green Book, which was the document that told Black travelers where it was safe to stay. But when I was thinking about it, it occurred to me that the Green Book only tells you where it's safe to stay. That's it. It's no Yelp reviews. The only thing the Green Book tells you is that you will survive the night. So I realized there's a lot of wiggle room in that. And so when they're traveling and they're using the Green Book, it occurred to me that just because a place will accept Black people, it doesn't mean they will accept these Black people. Like, proprietors have some rights. And so here they are, these kids, they're like late teens, 2 boys, 2 girls, none of them are married. And I just thought like there's gonna be a Black lady in a rooming house who's gonna be like, no, not over here. This is not that kind of place. And so they needed to find a place to say that would accept them not only as Black people, but as unmarried, men and women. And so I was like, well, where are they going to stay? And then I felt like the character, I felt like she just jumped out and she asked them, are y'all saved? Are y'all Christians? And they were like, yes, ma'am, we are all of us baptized. And she said, well, just so you know, this here is a whorehouse. Annie was shocked. I was shocked. But then it made sense. And I just, like, if I have a revelation and it makes sense, then I can move on with it.
All right. So one of the things I am most fascinated about in this book is how you really wind up exploring what respectability looks like. I think respectability in Black American culture can wind up being a thing that is so oppressing, but also can be the thing that helps lift families. And you just talking about the whorehouse. You just talking about the whorehouse really makes me think, how do you write about respectability without without the judgment that can come from it? You explore it in so many different ways, and none of them feel judgmental in this book.
I think there is a very low bar of standards that when Black people have standards at all, people are quick to tell them they're into respectability, right? Like, I feel like any time Black people are like, I don't think that's a good idea, people are like, oh, look at you, respectability. I feel like that when Evelyn Higginbotham made this term respectability, the politics of respectability, she was really talking about like the ways that the kids who participated in the sit-ins in Little Rock were so dressed up, how they looked immaculate. And so the way that they used their immaculate presentation to highlight the injustice of how they were treated. Like, it was a strategy. And I feel like when we talk about respectability, we make it seem like it's just these arbitrary rules and regulations. And I just don't think that's true. My mother was a child activist in Oklahoma City when she was 15. They got all dressed up and they sat in at this lunch counter every day for the entire summer. And then when school started, they sat in on Saturdays and they did it again the next summer. Because in Oklahoma City, different cities had different strategies themselves on how they were going to deal with these, protesters. And in Oklahoma City, they just decided that they were going to ignore them. So they just had this war of the wills. And part of the way that Mommy and her friends, part of their part in this staring down was their respectable dress. And I don't see that as a negative thing, but I think that the way respectability has been talked about has kind of taken away that empowerment that it has. So when Niecy meets her in-laws, they are like the most respectable people. The father is not only a doctor, he is a lawyer. He's a doctor lawyer. JD, MD, baby, yes. And she's never seen such a thing before. And it represents a kind of progress. And there are moments in there when she is limited by the strict rules of their respectable world. But also unrespectable worlds have rules too. Right? Like, I mean, how many people's, everybody okay? What happened? Oh, we good? Okay, we're good. I was just thinking though, how many people have felt oppressed by your unrespectable grandmothers? Well, insisting that you wear that slip when it's really hot. She's not a lawyer. Your granddaddy wasn't a lawyer, but you were going to wear that slip. So these kinds of rules of decorum were not limited to the middle class. And I just really wanted to think about the ways these rules, but I was interested, speaking of decorum, in the oppression of 1950s undergarments. I got that Sears catalog. I didn't even know how you would put some of that stuff on. And I do think about that. You know, you remember the long line girdle, the long line bra, and I do think that that is a metaphor for the era, for that. And, you know, whatever you have on right now, think about what you got on right now. Just think about your clothes. Just whatever you have on right now, somebody in the 1950s thinks you are naked.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard you mention that you had some experience with that for yourself on a day when you needed to be in uninterrupted whites, and that pantyhose were a problem.
I know, people still wearing pantyhose in these organizations. I was like, I don't know how, without the aid of a time machine, I'm supposed to get these pantyhose I have to wear on Sunday.
Listen, we can find them.
I know, exactly. Yes, I know. One of my fellow members of the Lynx sent me the pantyhose. She was like, "I got you." And I was like, I thought I was going to lead this rebellion, and none of us were going to wear them. But no, they found some for me.
That and lace gloves. I don't know what the deal is, but
Well, but you know the thing about the white, like white has a different connotation now. But you know these Black women's organizations wearing these white dresses. But you know in the period of right after emancipation, the white dress was the dress that everyone had. And that cotton dress, you could bleach it and get it white again. So wearing that white dress too was also an expression of dignity. I think Ken is a story about all the ways people are searching for dignity. When I was editing the book, I did a search for the word dignity. It came up so many times, I had to think of other ways to expressing it, because you know it was feeling repetitive. But it is everyone has this quest for dignity. That's what people want more than anything.
great. So you touched a second ago on the in-laws, and a friend and I were having a little debate last night about the in-laws. She thought
You want me to read about them? But go ahead, I'm listening to you. Let me see
she
if I
thought
can
that
find.
Miss McHenry is a villain.
She's what?
A villain. I didn't think she was a villain. I thought.
Oh
she
no,
was
I
a
don't even have
strategist.
villains in my stories.
Um,
I find villains to be boring in stories. I'm listening to you. I'm just looking for the space.
she's not here tonight, but I know she's watching. And for the record, I was right.
But I do think that people, when you have a character who is a woman who, you know, is like Mrs. McHenry, she's middle class, she wants things done in a certain way. Our genre expectation in stories is that is a villain. Like I feel like people do not have compassion for such people in stories. I think they like them in life, they don't like them in stories. And I think that people really like people who are struggling in stories, but they don't respect them in life. So people's expectations in stories is different.
Yeah. So, continuing with Miss McHenry, she talks about needing a moat between where you came from and where you're going. Do you think that's survival wisdom, fear, both? Where does that come from?
You know, I think it's both. I mean, the real question the main thing that comes between friends is when one friend gets married or one friend has a change in status. And the question is, can you take your people with you? Are you able to take your people with you? And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. And but I think many times you can, but you definitely can't take everybody, and trying to make that decision is difficult. Okay, you want me to read about Mrs. McHenry? Okay, here we go. I had to find a place. This is Vernice. This is the first time she's been over these people's house. Mrs. McHenry explained that they were good uplift people, lifting as they climbed. They belonged to the NAACP and many other organizations that contained the words Negro and national or colored. The father held degrees from the Big Three. After Morehouse, he went to Howard and Meharry both. He signed his name Richmond McHenry, JD, MD. He named his law firm McHenry & McHenry even before his sons were born. The oldest boy turned his tassel at Morehouse, but after Meharry, he decided that being a doctor was plenty. The middle boy left the United States completely, calling himself a writer. The youngest one, Franklin, had been sickly as a child, but was blessed with the quickest mind. With his Morehouse bachelor's and JD from North Carolina Central, he was the second McHenry on his father's shingle. With her up-to-the-moment fashion and trim figure, Mrs. McHenry was the ideal wife for a doctor lawyer. She was attractive, but not so much that it made her husband seem impractical. Her 3 kids proved that she was serious about motherhood, but she didn't have so many children that you wondered if she thought she was living on a farm. When she opened her mouth, perfect words floated out. Obviously, the immaculate grammar had come from somewhere, yet she didn't flaunt her education. She invited me over to her home for tea with a smile that said, "Dear, this is how it's done." Her youngest son, Franklin, came to collect me at the ornate gates in front of the campus. A magnificent magnolia tree known as the Sojourner dropped a heavy cone bursting with ruby seeds. It grazed my shoulder as I caught it tumbling toward the sidewalk. I turned the spiky cone in my palm, and it seemed significant. Each seed, red jewel, nested in its own nook, was tethered by a delicate cord. The McHenrys lived on Veltri Circle, in enemy territory, Mrs. McHenry quipped with a trill of satisfied laughter. They were only the 3rd Negro family to purchase a home in Cascade Heights. There are rumblings about them putting up a barricade to keep anyone else from moving in, she explained, slicing vegetables for our lunch. Like a little piece of wall can stop the march of justice. She popped a wheel of cucumber into her mouth. The day we arrived, you should have seen us. My sons were unimpeachable, I tell you. You could cut yourself, they were so sharp. As the movers unloaded our furniture, those white folks almost passed out. When my Chippendale couch came off that van, they knew a new day had dawned. She laughed so hard she nearly choked. I don't know why I like that part so much. My husband says I'm obnoxious, but he loves it.
I'd like to remind everyone that we will be taking questions, and so you have cards, please. You have a few people in the aisles picking up cards and with extra sheets, so please turn them in. All right, so the opposite of the McHenrys, but also a very important chosen mother, is Lulabelle. Lulabelle is my favorite character. I love everything about her. And she is definitely a counterweight to Mrs. McHenry. She is 100% outside of respectability, but to your point, that does not mean she is without wisdom or care, or that there are not rules in her world also. Do you see them as opposites, or do you see them similarly as women who were doing what they had to do to survive?
Lulabelle is the one that runs the whorehouse. I feel like Lulabelle and Mrs. McHenry are almost the same people. I mean, they're both 2 women who want to run their own domain. They want to be mistress of their domain, both of them. And both of them are trying to figure out how to make their life within a man's world. And they both think they're right all the time. And they are right frequently. But neither one of them ever wants to think she's wrong, and they think they want to impart wisdom to the next generation. So I feel like they have a lot in common, and they are both unimpeachable in their clothing. I feel like they could share clothes.
Oh, okay. Okay. I don't know how these uninterrupted whites are going to look at the whorehouse.
But I think you could wear it on Sundays.
All right, so another thing that really stands out to me is the themes in the book around shame, and how really shame is just women policing themselves. Where do you think either of them, where do you think either of them really learned shame or explored shame in their, or had shame? How do I want to ask it? How do you feel either of the girls experienced or were forced to experience shame? Because really, that is beliefs that is put on you that you take on
think all of us. I think we learn shame. Actually, oh, that baby's so cute. She's so precious. I think we all learn shame not from what people say about us. We hear shame from hearing how people talk about other people. Like you learn to have shame about your own body by hearing somebody talk about what somebody else has on.
That's what I was looking
And they're put them out as cautionary tales. Don't be like her. And I think that happens to them just like everyone else. I mean, Annie has the shame of her mother, having abandoned her, and that is a shame because we believe that as a baby or whatever, you should inspire your mother to be a different kind of person. And I think with Nisi, I think most of her shame is about sexuality, and we learn shame about sexuality by the way that people talk about people who do not follow the rules.
All right, one last question, and then I'm going to move to this nice stack of audience questions I just received. I want to touch on your perspective of the civil rights movement and how it was explored outside of what it is most of us know about it. Most of us know the respectability and the proper ways, but really you touched on the everyday life that was happening at the same time in what most people were experiencing during the civil rights movement. Was that a choice, or was it just more of the story unfolding for you?
I think that when you think about this, the idea, the choice to demonstrate, there was a huge cost to that. Like my dad, imagine my daddy, he grew up in a small town, Louisiana, went to the Army, came back, was able to go to college, and then he participated, in the sit-in movements, and he was thrown out of school. So think about daddy, poor, 12 kids, 3 rooms, manages to get to college, and he puts it all on the line for justice, and his reward is that he's thrown out of school. So in this book, Nisi is asked to participate, but she feels like she can't afford it. She cannot afford it. And so the girls who have more, resources and parents with connections, they are able to participate. And I think that is a wise use of their privilege. Like, I don't judge them I don't think that their contribution is made meaningless because it was less risky. It was a way that they used that. But I also think that, this a little sidebar about Daddy, Daddy found out, so Daddy was mad for many years about that, like just kind of left a bad taste in his mouth. And then he found out as an adult that the college presidents, all the HBCUs expelled those kids, but they called each other back channel and said, I'm expelling these kids. Can you take 2 at your school? Can you take 2 at your school? Fisk, we'll take ours over here if you take these over there. But they could never tell the kids because the whole purpose of expelling them was to maintain the school's funding, et cetera. So if it was known that they were looking out for them, it would undermine the whole thing. So for all these years, Daddy had that, and then found out later that no, somebody was looking out for him.
We have some great audience questions here. This one says, at what point in writing did you realize how the book was going to end? And did that come to you earlier from the beginning, or did it sneak up on you?
I did not know how it was going to end. I feel like I write to find out how it ends the same way that you read to find out how it's going to end. I'm like, so what are they going to do? But I will say this. I had made a full draft. Okay, I don't think this is a spoiler. A little bit, not much. I'm gonna be real careful with it. I knew that you cannot make a big deal in the first 100 pages about Joette being from the biggest funeral home family in Georgia. If you were going around there saying somebody's from the biggest funeral home family in Georgia, well, clearly somebody's not gonna make it. But I didn't know who, and I had given myself kind of a soft way out because I did not want to devastate myself in writing the book. And the way that I had written it, the ending I felt like as a reader you would say, that's unfortunate. But you don't go 300 pages to say, that's unfortunate. You want to go 300 pages and be like, no. So I had to be willing to put myself in a vulnerable emotional place to write the ending if I was going to end the book in a way that was true to the story.
I want to rewrite the whole ending of this book. I can't say anything else, but I got a chapter that rewrites it. There. I had feelings. I'm sorry, y'all. I have feelings. Speaking of which, one of the questions here says, if you could write an entire spin-off book from the perspective of a more minor character, who would it be and why?
Okay, the thing about writing spinoffs or even sequels is that you got to think about at the end of the book. I like to think that I get the people off on a good foot where their problems in the future are not book level, right? So I like to think that I get everybody to a place where they'll be all right, and whatever happens then will be regular problems. But the only person I would think of in having a spinoff would be Joette. And that I think I know what happens. I'm gonna tell you what happens to her. I think I know what happens to her. But I don't think her problems are enough. But I think she's gonna move to DC, and she's going to live in a brownstone in DC with her wife. But in the 80s, she's gonna really come into her purpose, because in the 80s, think about it, during the AIDS epidemic, funeral homes wouldn't take the people who died of AIDS. And this would be her way of her carrying on the work of her family, which is to give people dignity in death. And that would be a time when that was needed again. So I think that's what she would do. I think she's fine. I think she's in her 80s. I think there was a feature on her in a magazine recently. And you know, she's getting her flowers now. Like on some significant anniversary, they'll be talking about the unsung heroes of that time, and it will be her. Yeah.
Whose writing do you envy?
I mean, I would say, whose writing do I admire? I admire every word of Toni Morrison. Everything, because, and what I admire about Morrison is just, one, how interesting she is on the level of line. Like the simple lines, like in Song of Solomon, when she says that man treated that woman like she was the third beer, the one you drink just because it's there. When I read that, I was like, ooh, I hope nobody will ever say that about me. I mean, that's a way with words. Like, because everybody always talks about Morrison being so difficult, but I think that is really unfair to just the way that she writes. And also, Morrison plots like a house on fire. Like, her characters do some wild things. And I love that she doesn't feel like you have to choose between being a smart writer and being a wild writer. You know, she does all the things.
Do you have any advice or examples for sustaining a lifelong friendship?
I think the main thing in being in a lifelong friendship is that you have to realize that your friendship is a relationship. Our friendships are the other love stories in our lives. And you have to take care of your friends. You got to treat them with respect. You have to give them a place of honor at your table.
Speaking of relationships, are you?
That's scary. What?
Oh.
Am I what?
Can you or will you tell us about some of your own relationships that have shaped some of your characters?
You know, I feel like every story I write, I never write characters experiencing an emotion I have not felt. I may not have experienced the situation they're in, but I know how they feel. And that's kind of how I go about it. You see how I dodged that? Like, thank you. I try.
Okay. Is there a story or type of story that you want to write but haven't been able to yet?
I do think every book you write gets a little harder because you've exhausted all your obvious subject matter. Like my first book is called Leaving Atlanta, and it's about growing up in Atlanta during the Atlanta child murders. That's when I grew up, so that's my obvious story. And so as you keep going, you're either, like if you're a normal person, by 3 books, you've exhausted your autobiography. You know, that's it, you don't have any more. And then you're either writing about things, you're either making it all about a whole cloth, or you're talking about something you didn't really want to talk about. Like, so for example, when I wrote my third novel, Silver Sparrow, it's about two girls who have the same father. They have different mothers, but one is like a secret daughter. You know, she knows she can never say her father's name in public. My father is not a bigamist. I always have to say that. Like, the story is about a bigamist. My dad is not a bigamist, but I do have sisters that we have the same dad. We have different mothers, and we have completely different lives. And this is something that has haunted me my whole life, and I was reluctant to write about it. But by the time I got to my third book, it was time to write that. So I feel like time will reveal to. I didn't even know how much I had been nibbling at the edges of that story until I wrote it. And I realized in every book I write, somebody has a half sibling. That it's something that's on my mind. So I don't know, like even with this book, I did not know that I wanted to write a book about my mother's era. I actually had a contract to write an entirely different book, you know, a modern book about race and gentrification. But this is the story that came to me. And I realized that I moved to Atlanta because I wanted to get to know my mother better. I wanted her to talk to me like Irene says to Nisi. I wanted her to talk to me like we were two grown women. And when I would come home to visit Atlanta, I would be at my parents' house. I'd be sleeping in that childhood bedroom. You know, it's stuffed animals in there. Nobody gonna talk to you like a grown woman when one person is in a room with stuffed animals. So I thought that when I moved home, but I realized that that's my fantasy. My fantasy is that my mother would talk to me like we were two grown women. That's not her fantasy. And when I wrote this book, I realized that I was unable to see her as a woman, as a grown woman making grown woman decisions. I was thinking of her as just my mother. And in writing this book, it allowed me to expand my understanding of her and her whole generation.
So one thing that we haven't talked about yet, and I don't think I've heard you talk about too much in any interviews, has been I believe it's 3 relationships in the book that are queer relationships.
Happy Pride.
Yes, happy Pride. What inspired you to explore those relationships in the novel? Now, that's the question that's being asked here. Each one of those relationships is very different. I know elders in those exact circumstances. What made you explore the different ways that those relationships look?
It has surprised me that nobody ever asked me about those relationships. Hardly anyone asked me about them. And I thought that was going to be something that would come up. And it almost seems like people feel like it's impolite to ask. But when I realized that Nisi and Joette were going to have a relationship, I was, you know, Nisi was surprised. I was surprised, but I could see it. I was like, I see that. But then I really definitely did not want them to be tokenized within the novel. I did not want them to have no examples or to feel like they invented this same-sex attraction. So I was like, okay, somebody else in this book. I was looking at everybody. And then I looked at that school teacher. I was like, Miss Jemison, where is your husband? And then I felt like Nisi when I realized that her landlady, that she wasn't just living over there as a boarder. I was surprised as well, but it made sense. And so I put that together, so that made sense to me. And then when we have the other pair, the men, they had to be people who would rent to somebody with an unsavory reputation. So they had to be people who were on the fringes. And I love the way, though, that they are so deeply religious that they believe they have prophetic gifts. One believes he has the gift of speaking tongues, one has the gift of interpreting tongues, and they feel like if God didn't love us, why would he give us this gift?
Those were great nuances in relationships in the book. I really enjoyed those characters. This question says, you've mentioned that you let your stories unfold as you write. What is the driving force or principle that you have as you write? Themes, relationships, characters?
I have to make sure the characters feel like they live in the world, not like they live in a book. I mean, that was the one thing, particularly with how I ended the book. These characters have to feel like they live in the world. If they feel like they lived in a book, they could pull a rabbit out of a hat, they could find their way out of situations. I have to make them feel like they're real. But making them feel like they're real not only means that when something tragic is about to happen, I have to let it happen. Having them feel real also means they get to have a good time. Because sometimes when I write this book and it's set, people see it's set in the 50s, I'll tell you, I was getting interviewed on a radio station, and it was clear to me this lady hadn't read the book. And it was clear to me because, I teach undergraduates, which means I talk to people all the time who are pretending like they've read books. And so it was really clear she hadn't read. So this is what she did. She looked at the back of the book. She was like, okay, I got to do this interview in 10 minutes. Let me see. 1950s, Jim Crow, black, women. Oh, my goodness. Okay, let's go. And so I sat down, and she was like, I had to keep putting this book down. It was so difficult. It was so painful for me to reckon with the past in this country, the racism. And I said, this book? And she said, yes, I just had to walk out the room. I was like, this book, these people. Because in her understanding of that period of the Jim Crow era, she could not imagine that people are falling in love. She could not imagine that people, find themselves stuck for 6 weeks, in a sharecropping whorehouse. And she can't, imagine what went on at the juke joint, all this kind of stuff. She couldn't imagine it. All she could see was this time period and tragedy, which means she was imagining people that live in the book. Because, people that live in the book, because people that live in the world, they move, they go through life, they have pleasure, they have humor. And so you got to get it all in. So that's my guiding principle, is that you have to do the full range of human experience when you write a novel. Like when I was writing my first book about growing up during the child murders, I told this woman I was writing a book about growing up during the child murders, and she said to me, this is when I was living in Iowa City, She said, oh my, you must not have even had a childhood. And that really upset me, because having a childhood is part of being a human being. And so she thought she was voicing compassion for having lived through this period, but really she was compromising my understanding of my own humanity. And so when I wrote Leaving Atlanta about the child murders, I had to also include the sweetness and humor of girlhood, because that happened too.
So one of the other things that you touch on in the book that I think is really important in today's day and age is birth control and the lack thereof at the time. I know you say the characters write themselves and that story writes itself, but that conversation is just so important. What are your thoughts on leaving that in as a topic? And do you feel at all like you are predicting the future?
When I started writing this, it was set in the 50s, I noticed how much the idea of an unwanted pregnancy was on people's minds all the time. I was born in 1970, so that means that by the time I came of age, people had access to safe, reliable contraception. But it took me a while when I was writing this to really get my head around the idea when there was a time when people just had no control over their fertility. It's like, people were just out here rolling the dice. And what would that mean? And it wouldn't just have consequences for the one person. Like, look at Annie's granny. Her children keep bringing more children home for her to raise. Aunt Irene, suddenly having a child to raise, so that no one can control their lives if they cannot control their fertility. So I was really thinking about that, and also, while I was writing is when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and so that did inform the writing. I think that writing about the past, it's easier to write with a certain levity of spirit, because like even when I'm writing about Jim Crow, I know the Civil Rights Act is coming. I know what's coming. So I can say to my characters in my head, hang on, y'all, this is happening. I feel like if I was writing right now, I don't know what tone I would take because I don't know what's around the corner, and I am very afraid.
So we have a question here that is really about how you use language and dialogue, which I think is something that everybody who has read your work is amazed by. They reference terms like trifling. They spelled it with a G. So
It's hard to translate spoken language to written language. It's really hard.
yeah. So terms like are terms like trifling actually used? I think many of us know that they are. And are there other examples of phrases, maybe that you grew up with, that are important to you or you think are really important to our culture?
Well, the thing about, I met a linguist who told me that the difference between a dialect and a language is that a language has untranslatable words. So, for example, like we take a lot of words whole cloth from French because we can't translate them into English, like the word petite. There's no English word that means petite. It's not short, it's not small, it's got that feminine connotation, so we just use that word. And so he said to me that the word trifling is an example of an untranslatable word from the African American vernacular. That that you can't exactly explain what it means. There's no comparable word. You can just say what it is. And it could be little things like people who only put lotion on the parts of their body that will show. That is trifling behavior. You got to put the lotion everywhere. It also scales up. It scales up because Annie's mother abandoning her is also trifling. And it changes with tone, like those African tonal languages. So it is an example of just the complexity and ingenuity of African American vernacular. And I kind of go into that particular word, but the rest of it, I try to use the language as lightly as people use it in real life. Like when people in real life speak in their own vernacular, they're not like thinking about it the way a linguist would. They're just using it. And so that's an important thing, is that you need to make sure, again, that the characters feel like they live in the world, like they don't know they're in the book. But the challenge really is how do you write it? Like every now and then there's a phrase I want to use, but I can't figure out how to write it in a way that doesn't make it too conspicuous, that it has to the reader's eye has to be able to skim over it and hear it. So sometimes there are terms, I just couldn't use it. I just couldn't do it.
This question says, you write about people who are trapped by circumstance, by love, by who they used to be. Do you ever feel trapped by anything as a writer?
You think these people seem trapped? I feel like they seem not trapped, but I do feel they feel bound because they always have the option to get out, but they just decide that what is inside the circle is more beneficial to them than what they would lose if they leave. So I don't think they're trapped. I think as a writer, I do sometimes I'm aware, I guess I'll say, I'm aware of expectations, which is why before Ken, I had never written a novel set in the past, because I felt like as a Black writer, there were people who felt like it is my job to fill in the blanks of history. As a Black writer, you have a responsibility to tell the stories that didn't get told. But then I used to think, well, if I'm going to tell my grandmother's story, then is my granddaughter going to tell my story? I mean, I'm sure I don't even have a granddaughter, but I'm sure my hypothetical granddaughter is a genius, and she could write a wonderful story, but she can't write my story more than I can write my story. So I said, I'm just going to write my own generation, and that'll be one less thing for her to have to worry about. I got this. Because I resented that pressure. But I feel at the same time that in me saying, I'm not going to write this story of the past because that's what they want me to do, I'm still letting them control what I do. And that is the thing I have really struggled against, not pushing back so hard against expectations that I end up being controlled by expectations.
Being a professor yourself, do you think that a successful writer has to be college educated and well-read? And it says, for example, having read projects by James Baldwin, Shakespeare, or even Alice Walker.
I do think a good writer has to be well-read. I think that's simple. Like, I can't imagine someone saying, I want to be a musician, but I don't listen to music. Like, you never hear it, you know? I don't think you have to go to college, but I think you have to be familiar with the form you're trying to do. And it takes a long time. I think education is helpful because when you are educated, particularly educated in writing, your teachers can teach you shortcuts. So you could learn it yourself, but it may take you longer than someone else teaching you. Like, this is a very small writing tip that a teacher gave me that has helped me so much. And like I said, I could have figured it out, but it would have taken me longer, which was this simple thing. When you take a scene, ask yourself, does this scene use at least 4 of the 5 senses? Yeah, you know, and you do that little checklist, you realize you need another one, you add a smell, you're good to go. And someone taught me that, and that was super helpful. It was something like, just like I taught y'all in 5 seconds, someone who's writing a book was like, I'm gonna keep that. And you learn that. So I think education in writing is helpful in that, because you have someone who's done it before who can show you the way. But no, there are people who are self-taught who are really good, but they read.
I have a question here. I'm very curious about the question. It says you were mentioned in Judy Blume's biography.
That is true.
Can you talk about that?
I sure can. Well, did the person read the biography? Obviously. I mean, 'cause how would they know I was in there? Okay, I'll tell you. Y'all, Judy Blume saved my career. I was in a terrible state. This is like in the 2010s. There was a new app for phones called BookScan for publishers, and they could put your name in the BookScan, and it would spit out how many copies you sold. And so they could have a concrete number as to, your marketability. See, before BookScan, you could act successful. And they would believe you, but after BookScan, you could act however you want. They had this thing on their phone. And so when I wrote my 3rd book, Silver Sparrow, we were just getting turned down because of the BookScan. They would be like, nope, BookScan, because also whenever a technology is new, people over-rely on it. So anyway, I was told that I needed to get a new name and pretend to be a whole new person that didn't even have a BookScan, you see? And I was sad, but I kept working on my book because I teach, and I tell my students, you write the story, your spirit calls you to write. You don't write for a market, and I definitely could not write for an app. So I finished my book. I knew it would never be published, but I printed this about the sisters. So I printed a copy for myself, and I sent a copy to my sister because I wrote it for her. So I sent it to her, and I thought that was the end of my writing career. But I was invited to a book festival in Florida, and I was embarrassed to go because, I have been basically kicked out of the industry. My other books are out of print, so I wouldn't have any books to sign at the book signing. But the only reason I went is because I was the only Black person going, and I didn't want them to say, well, we tried, and she didn't show up. So I was, I call myself taking one for the team. So, okay. I went to the book festival, and I didn't expect to have any books to sign, but I saw a little stack of my books, and I said to the people, where'd you get them? And they said it came in this box. They showed me the box, and I recognized my daddy's handwriting. And I said, Daddy, he said, well, we had some books at the house. He said, then I was thinking, he said, your uncle bought some books. I went over and got them. He said, now those are new books. Your uncle did not use those books. He said, so don't let them sell them at a discount, because let me tell you, that book is not used. He said, so you sign those books, and then if anybody else wants a book, you just tell them you're so popular, you sold out. I said, well, he said, it wouldn't be a lie. I said, okay, okay. So I signed the little 4 books, and I was just sitting there, and this lady came up to me, and she says, I want to buy a book. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'm so popular. I've sold out. And she said, oh, that's strange, because I heard that you can't get a book contract. I heard that your book's out of print. Is it true you're getting a pseudonym? And I was like, oh, no, ma'am. I was so embarrassed. I didn't even know what to do. And she said, I think I can help you. And she took my hand and she carried me through the crowd, and she put my hand in the hand of a publisher. And I was so embarrassed because I knew about the book scan. So I was trying to get away. And the publisher lady said, well, I can see you got someplace to be, but before you go, she says, tell me, how do you know Judy? And I said, oh, I don't know Judy. She said, I mean, Judy Bloom, who just introduced us. And I turned to tell her thank you, and she had vanished in a puff of smoke like a fairy godmother. And so that's why I'm in the biography. Did you Google that?
I didn't. I didn't. I almost didn't ask it because I didn't know if it was true, if it was just a crazy question.
And she's so kind that when I finally got to meet her, I told her about it. And I could tell it took a second to click because she does so many kind things. And then she said, I'm so glad it worked out.
I love it. One last question. If Kin is, in part, a bridge between generations of Black women, what do you hope we carry across that bridge after we close the book?
I really hope that there are 2 things I want to do. One is I really want us to all think about your friends and just realize how blessed you are to have those relationships and how significant they are, and that you will nurture your friendships. But also, I want you to think about motherhood, because one thing with Annie, her mother, is out there somewhere, and she has this fantasy mother in her mind. It's as though she's seated at a beautiful table, beautiful dinner table, and she's saving this seat right here for her mother, and no one can sit next to her because this is her mother's seat. And then I feel like she decides that no one can eat until her mother gets here. So she's letting her, her devotion to a fantasy keep her from enjoying real life. And also, I thought about the ways that all mothers are compared to a fantasy mother. Like when we say someone is motherly, we already know what we think that means. And so a real life flesh and blood woman can never compare to the fantasy of a mother. And are we missing the mother who's sitting right here because of the fantasy mother in our heads? And so that is what I want people to walk away with. And before we go, I just have one more thing that I want to say. Because in my experience, whenever people come together for a writing event, there are people in the room who are writers, or who want to be writers, or who haven't yet started to call themselves writers. And people always ask me what advice I have for young people. And I think the young people are fine. I think they don't need my advice. They have each other, they have the internet. But I do want to say something to grown people, because sometimes I teach writing classes and I want to teach grown people, because grown people have lived life and have stories to tell. And my message to you is that, one, it's not too late. You can write that book. And secondly, I know you're busy. I know all the things that make you busy. You got kids, you got grandkids, you got a job. I hope some of us are out here trying to save democracy. We got busy things to do, but all these busy things that keep you from writing, don't think of them so much as an impediment to your dreams. Look at the ways that all these things that make you busy make your life meaningful and will make your work meaningful. people say to be a writer, you have to write every day. And that disqualifies so many of us because, like I said, we're busy doing meaningful things. Yes, there are people who can write every day. There are, people sitting around at home in their pajamas, writing their book every day. But frankly, I don't want to read that person's pajama book. I want to read your meaningful story. If you write a page a day, that's a book in a year. You write a page every other day, that's a book in 2 years. You see, so you can get it done, and it needs doing. There's someone out there that is waiting for your story, and I just hope that today, tomorrow, or the next day, you'll sit down and at least write a few words on it. Thank you.
Oh. All right. Just quickly, before everybody escapes, Tayari, I want to thank you for our conversation tonight. Thank you for showing Black women's lives in such a tender but complex way. I genuinely appreciate it. We want to thank everyone here tonight for supporting the AViD series and for being a part of this conversation. Tayari will be signing books after the program, and of course, Beaverdale Books has copies still available for purchase in the corner. Also, before we leave, a reminder that the final AViD event is Saturday, June 27th with Patrick Bringley. That event begins at 11 a.m. Doors open at 10. Thank you again for being here, and please please help me thank again. Thank you all.